he made a date to come see me. This would be 2 weeks ago tomorrow. And Tom had come up to see me once in the hospital, like, where did the book come from? And I used, who's the vice president of the Brotherhood? Oh, he signs the newsletter. Huh? Jim Mills, yeah. Jim had been to see me the night before and had given me his presentation on origins for a person that likes the Bible. And it's based on demoniacal possession and the fact that this is impossible since the bestowal of Jesus, because God's Spirit is in man. But if God's Spirit approved of something, it could step aside and let a good spirit go in to do the same sort of thing which evil spirits used to work mischief doing. It's a good way to present the origin of the book. So I'd been through this with Tom and his wife. So Tom made a date, come up and see me Sunday. That was a busy weekend. And I was just sure that Tom wanted to discuss the deity absolute, or the supreme being, or what is this personality concept. But I've learned to be passive. I mean, he has a reason for coming, and I don't know what it is. And what Tom wanted help from was how to present more of Part 4 in Sunday school. And also, Tom was getting a little discouraged. This man, regardless of the book, has got a lot of truth. The thing that intrigued me was that he feels that God is challenging men, and men are not aware of this fact, and men should be awakened to this fact. Gee, that's wonderful. He had this concept before he ever heard of this book. Well, we never did talk very much about the Urantia book. We talked about Sunday school, and we comforted each other. Tom just wanted to talk to somebody that had believed in religion the way he did. That's all. And I think I would have hurt this book if I'd have said, well, now, Tom, let's get into the difficult passages. Now, let's take the foreword as a starter. I think this would have been just about the worst possible thing I could have done. I wouldn't have helped him. I listened to his questions, and his questions told me what he wanted. And I took him as far as he wanted to go, and then we stopped.
I want to give us criticism, some constructive criticism on what we aren't doing.
I have no criticism to make of this group. I'm rather proud of this group. I think you're doing very well. What I'm saying tonight is not by way of criticism. I'm just sharing some thinking with you. Because, please, I never came this way before. I don't know how to do this.
How many revelations have you lost?
This is my first one. This is Archbishop. I'm a trainee at this. I didn't have this book but about a year longer than you folks had it. I've read it longer, but in terms of propagandizing it, I'm just about as green as you folks are. I've got just about 12 months on you, that's all.
Well, Bill, some of us are terribly concerned over this group not growing.
Yes, sir, we are.
Because we have put forth so much effort. I think one of the biggest blows I've had is the disinterest of some of those who were originally of this group, that we can't find any hook or crook way to come back and understand. Some of the original founders. And that, to me, has been a blow.
Do you remember the time of testing that the apostles went through very early in their career with Jesus? They were down on the Sea of Galilee. Nothing happened. Nobody persecuted. Weren't any miracles. There was no big multitude. They'd been to Cana and had survived that excitement. And this was a time of time testing of the 12. They had to develop endurance without much outside prod. And I feel that We could easily be going through such a time. Do you recall those passages in the paper? There's a term that our friends one time used. The term is providence selection. If you want to find out who can go the full route, and maybe not only the 2nd mile, but the 3rd mile, just wait. And these folks will automatically qualify or disqualify themselves. And they do it during a quiet time. Some drop out and some don't drop out. And I defy you to predict who will and who won't at the beginning of such a time. I don't believe you can determine this, but they will determine this. And this is the fairest way, I know, of selecting a group, because you don't sit in judgment on anybody. They judge themselves. And the scriptures do not say that you can't sit in judgment on yourself. They just tell you to keep it to yourself and don't extend it to other people. Well, no, I wouldn't be discouraged. I wouldn't be discouraged in the least. Me too.
Some of them that knew the book and went through it even before I did. I don't know.
Well, it's not only that with me, it's that I don't see new faces showing up. Interested parties like we used to see.
You seem to kind of settle down in this box. Well, the interested parties that we had, that was seed on child ground, evidently. It didn't take
let's
hold.
forget them. Let's forget them.
Well, I mean, they didn't do any good.
But I don't
so that
see
isn't
the
anything to be
new
discouraged
faces
about.
showing up. You see what I mean? Like we used to. We never had a meeting. We didn't have a new face or 2 or 3.
They didn't stay.
Well,
now,
but out of the new ones that we get, we should
let's analyze
hold a
that.
certain
So,
percentage of them.
This, I think, is a timely discussion we're having.
Very timely, Bill. You have punched the panic button.
I think this is
originally,
timely.
we got many new faces because of DM.
Well, and
We had a following.
enthusiasm. We had an enthusiasm. We've become complacent, I think, now. I think we've become complacent. We had a burst of enthusiasm there. We had something inspiring. We'd learned something that was new. We wanted to share it with somebody, and we was telling people about it.
Well, I can't point any one person.
Now, here's one thing. Of course, we all do have a cycle of friends. Then we went through them, and after you go through them, then you've got to find outside contacts, and that's where we stop.
It's like a new insurance salesman.
He
He sells all his friends.
He reached the periphery of his social contact, and he can't get any further.
This period of waiting and teaching was especially hard on Simon Peter. He repeatedly sought to persuade Jesus to launch forth with the preaching of the kingdom in Galilee, while John continued to preach in Judea. But Jesus' reply to Peter ever was, "Be patient, Simon, make progress. We shall be none too ready when the Father calls."
Make progress. There's more people stopping out.
As they thus tarried before embarking on their active public preaching, Jesus and the 7 spent 2 evenings each week at the synagogue in the study of the Hebrew Scriptures. In later years, after seasons of intense public work, the apostles looked back upon those 4 months as the most precious and profitable of all their association with the Master.
Of course, that may be true. In the future, we may look back upon these months of study that we're putting in and feel that they...
Who knows, Wilma?
We don't know what the end was, but, you know, what you just telling you, felt as the master intended for us to work.
Oh, I'm sure of it. But to work wisely.
Work life.
I have listened to much counsel, many ideas about the propagation of this book. And
You listened to counsel
yes,
within the...
within the brotherhood. And I don't feel too happy with those who seem to do very little except enjoy the book, and there are those. I have not seen a frenzied approach be too fruitful. There's a laddie out in California. He's a fine man. He's a salesman. He's been selling all his life. He set out to do some advertising out of his own pocket. And, well, he ran his ads and he didn't sell any New Rancher books that way. I guess maybe that's not the way to do it. I have a personal feeling simply to be alert to do all that I can do consistent with taking care of two prior obligations. Staying efficient and getting my material job done.
Keeping your radar on that.
Oh, I mean that. Keep your radar on all the time. Keep a troll line going.
I was surprised to find when we were in Chicago that there are individuals who cover this book.
Are there really? No, I didn't know this.
I didn't know that.
No, I didn't know.
That's new.
Yeah, this is news to me.
Hey, book peddler. You mean a door knocking peddler?
Well, the individuals outside the stores that make it their business. I tell you, one of them is. Who wasn't mixed up with I said tired today.
A-hole,
Yes, A-hole. A-hole's one of them.
which
Who
is
is A-hole?
very bad.
Oh,
Very
well,
He sends and gets 10 books at a time.
He's this
A-hole is
guy
in the
mixed up with this flying saucer out
Oh.
of Ocean.
Car, Otis
He's
Car.
on the West Coast now, and he is one of the
They'll see that.
Well, he's the last one
yeah,
I'd want.
yeah. In True Magazine, yes, I saw that.
A-hole is his right-hand channel.
Well, that doesn't surprise me.
Is he selling books?
He's selling books.
And they're selling them to him at cost, and he's making a profit on them. Well, I thought there was some
There's some woman.
restrictions there. You had to be in business or be a religious organization in order so many before
Why
then.
not? I talked to them, talked to them.
Well, they sent him to be in now.
I'm a little bit surprised. And
Yeah, I don't
a little
like
shocked.
guys like this a-hole, because if a fella is serious, then that's fine and dandy, even if he's on the wrong track, if he's serious. But I don't think this a-hole is.
No, I think A.O. just makes the money.
I do too.
Well,
Just like Otis Carr is making money.
That's right.
Just by hook and crook.
well,
In other words, it's falling into the hands of a
there's a wise piece of advice that I got from an old Swede boss of mine who was innocent of any higher education but was loaded with practical experience. We'll just let this stay on the tape. I think I can say it properly. But he just said that there are certain contests that one should never engage in with a skunk.
That's good.
Well. Foot race.
Yeah. It isn't fair to the skunk in that case. No, I would, for what one man's opinion is worth, I think you do all right down here. I wouldn't feel frustrated. I think you experienced a shrinkage. I think this was inevitable. I think my advertising buddy has experienced a terrible shrinkage in his enthusiasm. Because you see, I think he felt this book was some kind of a talisman. And that if you just got it to people, it would somehow do
Sell
things to
itself.
them. Yeah. And it didn't work. It just didn't work.
You know, right here, you're in a field that's the most highly competitive field there is. Religion.
Yep.
Becoming more so every day.
276 known denominations in the United States. I don't take in the sects and cults and such as that.
By the way, the Presbyterians have made a move and are going to try to push it through to have a consolidation of churches.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's a step in evolution.
Now, this thing on the other hand is not dying. It is growing. I think some growth. I think you folks have lived through a period of mushroom growth. And I think your shallow ground seed is withered. And I'm telling you, I keep holding to that parable of the sower. That's why Jesus told it, I think, to comfort folks like us. That go forth, hopefully, sowing seed, only to discover that the results vary because of circumstances largely beyond our control. And if you don't think I haven't been parent to many disappointments, you're just flat crazy. I've tried real hard, and I've learned to try in different ways. This whole story I've tried to write, it represents another approach, because the previous ones didn't work, so let's try this one. I've proved that some of them don't work because I've tried them.
Well, we laughed when we first got the book and we were studying it. BM and Bill and Jones and I would sit down. And it was amusing to us that Chicago organization, as long as they had these papers and only had 300 members. Well, we was going to do better than that the first year.
Yeah.
We didn't understand why they didn't have over 300 members.
And
Now I understand.
well, I'll say this: if you had talked to me at the time, I would have listened silently and said, "Go to it," because I wouldn't know what would happen until we tried it. But just like when Domestic Extension wanted to send out 50 books, I didn't think it would work, but I urged everybody on the executive committee to vote for it because I said, this is how we're going to find out how to do it. We have the money. It's been given for this purpose. Let's spend it and try. We don't know that this won't work. It didn't. All right? Now, that was an inexpensive way of checking that one out.
I believe, truthfully, that if we could have kept the church going out there and we could have kept him on earth, I believe we could have been a much bigger organization.
Oh, no question about it. Nobody.
Well,
People like to hear him.
He preaches a nice sermon, no question about it.
They like to hear him preach.
I heard him Easter. What year was it? It was earlier, wasn't it? No.
58.
That was a good sermon he preached. It was in the women's YWCA program. That was a very good sermon. Well, that didn't happen. No. Meredith left behind him in Culver, Indiana, a very folksy group of Methodists. Golly, what a chicken dinner they cooked. This was out in the farmhouse, and well, the side dishes were on the dining room table, and the main dishes were out in the kitchen, and I almost foundered on that dressing. And these are down-to-earth people. They're not going to lose this book. They're too earthy. I don't think I've laughed as much at a so-called Urantia meeting as we did that night. I don't know, we just got off on a funny streak and everything was funny. He's doing a good job at Indiana Technical. I think he's quite disillusioned about putting groups together. And he went through his period of enthusiasm. And I don't think this was a failure. I think this was educational. He's dean of the freshman class, and he teaches religion and ethics. And when he sets up his basic source material and reading, he just calmly puts the Urantia book in with all the other source books. This school has an abnormally high percentage of foreign students. For example, at one of the hotels, all of the bellmen are Hindus. And they all go to this school. I smelled that and asked one of them if he didn't attend, and he said, yeah. Well, I said, give my best to my buddy Sprunger down there. Oh, he says, I know Dr. Sprunger. Now there's a pump that's working.
I think Sprunger has something to do.
Oh, certainly it does.
I like him.
Mm-hmm. Sprunger has something else that I think could be very serviceable. Sprunger is a good politician with church experience behind him. And I think a successful clergyman has to be a good politician. And this doesn't subtract anything from his sincerity. I would refer to him to a politician in the same way that the papers refer to Matthew as a politician. I like this little guy. He's a sincere person. Down east, I'm discovering how long it takes when you plant a seed from scratch. This is the one seed I planted that really took root. I've scattered a lot of these books, but this is the one that's bearing fruit. Second Society bought 10 books at our society discount and sent them me to help in the missionary work. They paid us for them, and we could just get them easy for them. And I got a letter from Helena. 9 of the books are spoken for. Since most of them are being given away anyway, it seems just a darn in Connecticut. And there's something growing down there. It's very slow, very slow. But there are 5 gals that meet. I know 4 of the husbands. There's one husband I don't know. This is a red-faced gal with high blood pressure. She's a horsey Virginian type, you know what I mean? And if ever I saw a female Simon Peter, that's her. She's a real extrovert. And these gals meet every so often on a Monday. And my last 2 trips up there, I've laid over on Monday, and I've met with them. And the last trip, a couple of the husbands wanted to meet, but the gals closed ranks and said, you just go to work like you always do every month. Well, now there are 4 more gals that want to meet with this group, and they're playing hard to get. They're going to put them in a junior group and let them qualify themselves. And maybe playing hard to get will work. I don't know.
I think they got something there.
That's what they're doing down there. The principal spark plugs down there are one man and 2 women. Sandy Wall is a consultant, as I am. He's a brilliant engineer, and he's kind of an anchor man. Sandy has pretty well read this book. I think he could say he's read it, and he's interested in it. He believes it. And he has a good knack of leadership. Well, he's been president of the school board down there for 3 terms, I think. His wife is the unofficial secretary of their unofficial study group. I mean, she's the gal that gives communications, and she's got a pal Isabel, who was married to a VP in a trust department. And these two women are two of the most deadly plotters I've ever run up against. I mean, it's a real soft sell, and they figure strategy. Like, for example, if we're going to propose this to someone, who else do we have there that would, be important? They assemble social groups. Now, I'm encouraged because I think starting with one book in 1957, that will soon be 4 years ago, I think there must be about 40 books in that neighborhood.
Is it a small town?
It's Darien, Connecticut, and this is part of the whole built-up Connecticut area that's one of the bedrooms of New York City. It's a, it's a small
Is it
town.
near a university or something?
No, but these are mostly college people. They're mostly old sales executives or engineers or bankers
Well,
or the
Bill,
like.
when they get a class started down there outside of Chicago where the grocery system is,
Could be.
those two are going to try to get at least two more to start letting them. And they asked me if I thought that maybe you would come down.
I sure will.
If you get enough together. I think Bill would
I'll
come
do
down.
anything I can. I'll do anything I can find the time for.
Mrs. Wilson, Mrs. Donna Wilson, can put her fingers on 8 books that she has directly and indirectly done. People that said that are sincere. I mean, people that are really sincere. And she's so enthusiastic for it. She just talks and carries it with her. She just never loses it.
Our second society in Chicago has gone through a period of the doldrums. I've been sick. Gals have been having babies. My daughter's in Europe. One gal is going through hell and high water for her master's degree. One lad is going through hell and high water for his PhD. And everybody's traveling. And
You're not even meeting now.
yeah, we've been very derelict. And I've been concerned about this, but then I've thought it all through, and I've talked to a couple of them, and we're just going to have to live through these months. Everything, well, one gal is getting married, and she isn't exactly Urantia book-minded right now. If she is, she's reading the admonitions of the life carriers rather than the archangels. And they're kind of earthy folks. There's a period that we're going through. I could be very discouraged about that, except I think it's a phase, and we'll outlive this and get going again. I think we're going to go through phases. I think perhaps Oklahoma is going through a consolidation phase right now, where you are being less expansive, you are being less extensive and more intensive, where you are shaking down into a harder core, but your quality is going up in the sense that you are learning more about this blue book and what you're talking about. I would venture the guess, and since this is my first revelation, I'll have to guess. I wish it was the second one. Wouldn't that be handy? I will venture the guess that you will go through an expansion phase. Don't ask me when. I think it'll happen.
Well, we're out of town, you don't finish the book and all that. Oh, I think we need to start a new class.
I don't think being an intellectual student of this book helps you to sell it. Can't buy that.
I think you need to be a salesman.
There you are, right exactly.
She doesn't know what you're saying.
Well, but she,
That helps
idea
you.
is not to say too much.
I think JB has got a very good point.
I do. Now I'm just speaking from my own experience.
I think I could run Tom Archer off right now by talking to him.
Yeah, I think you could too.
I won't discuss this book very much with him. I just answer his questions. He's been slogging through part 4. Oh, he says, my God, Bill, it's a gold mine. You get my Sunday school lessons. He just plagiarized the book.
Well, I know one little girl up there, teaches Sunday school. She said she just couldn't teach Sunday school unless she had that 4-section of Urantia book.
Okay, she does, why?
She just died in a womb Methodist, and she's going to be there at that book. But she got the book, and she reads it, and she reads, and that last section, she rests on that. Because it helps her in her teaching, and she teaches youngsters, see.
She's not honest with herself. She can't read the
Well,
last section.
I don't have occasion to talk to her much. I never have had occasion to really sit down after she had gained some knowledge of the book and talk to her. I'd like to do that, but it isn't my contact, and I didn't ever feel it was my business to do it.
Let it ferment. Let it ferment.
But you couldn't take that book away from her no way in the world.
I'm all for that. If she never reads anything but Part 4, she's got a finer concept of God, and I'll settle for that.
I don't think you have to say it has to come to your extra class to know what's in this book.
Let's
Well, but
Sure don't
here,
know.
but here,
But I like it.
if you get indoctrinated in some small way to this book, isn't there something eating on you to want to know more than was me? I want to know more about it. And I was going to find out more about it. And I had a burning desire.
You know,
Well, don't that affect everybody that way?
I don't believe so, JP.
I don't understand people
That's
that...
the way it hits me, but I'm not so sure everyone is going to be hit that same way, because we're different in temperament.
I couldn't get enough of it when I first
Mhm.
got it. I just couldn't absorb enough of it. I was ever so disappointed in my life when I knew people, friends, the type of friends I knew they needed it. Oh, boy, they needed it worse than I did. And those are the kinds I couldn't get interested in, and I couldn't understand.
Well, no more artist. She just told everybody that she worked on about it. She just knew
Every time I did, I must say so.
Yes.
One of my
I
dearest,
sold one book.
One time, yeah.
one of my dearest friends is a fellow by the name of Dick. He's a few years younger than I am, not many. Has a position of major authority in a corporation. I've known Dick for 15 years. He's a distinguished looking guy. He has a natural, unconscious dignity, which is very effective because it's just not put on, that's Dick. He's one of the basic, fairest men, kind and tough at the same time. Very ethical guy. He is one of the most uninterested persons in the subject of God and religion I've ever known. I gave him a book one night on impulse. I've been staying a night or two with he and Rhoda. And Rhoda had given me a book, and I opened up my brief in my suitcase to put it away, and I had a blue book in there, and I said, well, I'll swap you. And next time I went there, Dick wanted to know about this, and I told him about it, my connection with it. And I think it was 2.5 years before he mentioned it again. And I just don't bring it up. I'm not going to let this blue book destroy that friendship, because I liked him before the blue book, and I'm going to go right on liking him afterwards. I'd like to put this book in a larger perspective, if I may. When I finished my term as president of the Brotherhood, a little over 3 years ago, I wrote a report to the Brotherhood. Burke, you've got a copy of it somewhere, haven't you? And I tried to sum up what we'd done in 3 years, how well we'd done and how poorly we'd done, and we did a bit of both. I don't think we did too badly for a bunch of green amateurs, but compared to the way a bunch of professionals would have operated, it was pretty lame and halt. But I think at the very end, I tried to analyze, what are we? And I took the position that we were neither a church nor a sect. I said, how can we be sure that we're not a church? I said, frankly, I don't think the modern society needs another church. I think we have a great plenty. We might need fewer. Certainly we don't need more. Well, I said, I don't think we're a church because we claim no ecclesiastical authority. Our officials have administrative authority. We have a constitution, and as president, I've tried to enforce this constitution to see to it that it worked. If somebody was being unconstitutional, I called him on it pretty straight and pretty fast. So I said, I don't believe we're a church. But now let's consider, are we a sect? Well, I said we might become a sect. I think it could be unfortunate if we do. Because if we're sectarian, which is the characteristics of a sect, then I said I believe we're confusing means with ends. I think our prime purpose in life should be the service of God. This is the true end. And everything leading to that is a means to that end. The Urantia book is not an end. It is a means to the end, and the end is God. We should be interested in doing anything we can do to make God more real to men and to introduce men to God if we can. This, to me, is our prime objective in life. The Urantia book I consider to be a most valuable tool in the achieving of this objective. But if I find a wayward Roman Catholic who really needs to be reintroduced for God, and if I believe that sending him back to his church is going to be the most effective way of reintroducing him to God, then I am not going to bring either the Urantia book or Protestantism into our discussion, and I have sent Catholics back to the Catholic Church. And one of them paid me a high compliment. He said when we got through, he said, "You're Jesuit trained, aren't you?" He thought I was a Catholic. If I find one of my brothers looking for God, and he's unhappy with what has been offered him, if, like Ingersoll, he went looking for bread and they fed him wind pudding, if he is disillusioned about the conventional approach, then I certainly will introduce him to this blue book, by all means. I think the brotherhood is also a means to an end. Now, I think this, if we put our whole lives in a larger perspective, and if we say we are primarily engaged in the attempted service of God to our fellow men, and this is our supreme goal, this is the true end. And this blue book, and the Urantia Brotherhood, and all the Urantia societies are helpful means, helpful tools to that end, then I don't think we'll ever become a sect. We will be a true brotherhood. And I think it's important that we sometimes stop and think of the difference between primary and secondary objectives. Our primary objective is the service of God. Our secondary objective is the propagation of the Urantia book. Does that make sense? And if we do not become confused in this issue, then I don't think we will ever be a sect. we will be a group of brothers, if you please, with a brotherhood, trying to work for the boss, and to serve him in whatever way seems practical. So if your Methodist gal wants to read Part 4 and get good out of it, I say more power to her. I don't think we should feel obliged to go out and recruit her. We should be happy that she's getting some help. But I think there are an awful lot of people in this world who are like me. The Brotherhood is the only church I've ever known. It's the only association. It's the only congregation I've ever been a member of. And there must be many folks like me who are looking for something like this. I take great pleasure in the comradeship of the Brotherhood. It's the only group I've ever joined in my life and have been active in. I'm a very poor member of a Greek letter fraternity, and that's the only other group I ever have joined. This is the second group I ever joined in my life. I'm just not a joiner. I would count our progress not only in terms of membership rolls, but of exposure to books and of how we serve the boss. I attended a meeting one time. Now, what I'm going to say, I say without criticism. This is just a registration of a happening. I gave a series of lectures in San Antonio once, all cribbed from the Urantia book, on the psychology of religion. They were good lectures because they came out of the Urantia book. This is 10 years before it was published. And I was invited to attend a meeting, a group meeting of ministers. And I went with a rather scholarly prepared speech. And I listened to this meeting, and I would have sworn I was meeting with a group of sales managers. Except they sang better than most salesmen. But their entire talk was about secular things. They were talking about quotas, territories, mortgages, memberships. And I threw my prepared talk away, and I took as my text one of Paul's letters, "Be resolved to know nothing but Christ and Him crucified." And I talked rather straight to this group. I said, you know, we don't need any advice from you about the affairs of this world or temporal bread. I said, I would resent you as competitors. I make my living counseling businessmen. I said, I don't think you know as much about this temporal life as I do. But if you've got a little bread that's not of this world, I said, there's a great market for this, if you have that kind of bread. I don't think we should become too absorbed in numbers, quotas, memberships, and whatnot. Too absorbed in numbers, quotas, memberships, and whatnot, to the point where we lose sight of the largest purpose we have in life, which is the service of God. This is the great purpose for living.
All of you remind me tomorrow to read the record of your
You see, this attempt at service makes an adventure out of any life, because it adds to life the condiments, the salt and pepper and spice of spirituality, or attempted spirituality. And when you look at anybody as a potential brother, life is a perpetual adventure then. You never know what's going to happen 5 minutes from now, or what you may be involved in. You're alert. It produces an attitude which changes your conduct. I'll illustrate the point. I found myself in a peculiar circumstance about 15 years ago. I was counseling a woman who was probably at that time my present age. And she was an unmarried school teacher. And I thought twice before I asked her this question. But I said, "Are you planning to be married?" And she kind of snorted, and she said, "Young man, don't be impertinent." Well, no, I said, "No impertinence intended. It's a very sincere question." Well, now, she said, "At my age, what a silly thing to ask, because I'm not married and I'm not going to be." I said, "That's probably why you won't be." But I said, "If you will just plan to be married, just that attitude may change your reaction." And for a long time, I treasured the telegram I got from her, from Miami 2 years later. She married the principal of the school, who was a widower.
You're a matchmaker, Bill.
No, I'm not.
Matchmaker.
I think, again, the attitude of the attempted service of God is just as important to our function in life as that woman's change of attitude. She began to plan to be married. That was all. She didn't have any man in mind. She just planned to be married. She wanted to be married, so I said, "Why not plan?" We're planning to serve God. And the mere presence of that plan in our minds is apt to make it more possible to serve God.
She turned her radar on.
She turned her radar on. Yes, Clyde.
Bill, when we first got this book and had it long enough to know a little about it, we thought it was a problem of pedagogy.
Mm-hmm.
But later on, I found out that it wasn't. You've got to find people that the soul is right to the source. And how are you going to find those scattered few here and there? See, that's the problem. It isn't a problem of pedagogy, because you're just talking to a bunch of people that's impervious to it.
Mm-hmm. The difference between the suspect and the prospect is the feeling of need. Jesus didn't confuse the two. Coming down from the Swiss lakes, he wasted no sales talk on the suspect. And Cain had got after him, as you'll recall. In case of doubt, I'd sow seeds. I'd always sow seed if I doubted. And I felt there was a chance. But since I'm going to gamble and take long chances, then I must be prepared to be disappointed a fairly heavy percentage of the time. But I'd rather be disappointed many times than miss one seed sowing.
I agree with you there, Bill.
How can you escape that paradox? If you're going to take long chances, you must expect frequent losses. That's just simple horse racing. You bet the long shots and you're not going to win very
You
often.
know, I was sitting thinking, while ago, you talking about this fellow in California who started just giving out books and advertising.
Mhm.
Now, if he only got one good student, one person that had revolutionized their life to have the books, and it's worth any amount of money that you might have been out.
Honey, I agree with you. But if he'd only had that philosophy, he'd still be pumping them out. He feels disillusioned. He was not just enthusiastic and diligent, he was naive.
Well, I think
In
we've all
his
been naive,
enthusiasm.
Bill. I
Who
think we're all
hasn't?
naive at
Who
times.
hasn't, Wilma? Who hasn't? We all have. We're all, none of us have. This is our first revelation. We'll do much better on the next one, I'm
We
sure.
just got to be so enthusiastic ourselves that we can't understand why someone else is enthusiastic.
Sure.
I guess we were first soil.
I guess you were. But you don't know where the patches are.
That's the trouble, locating the patches.
Now let me give you a
You know, our
larger,
patches is hard to find. Same way with the soul.
let me give you a larger picture. I don't think we're alone. And I don't think this book is dependent. And I know this is being recorded, so I'm being careful what I'm saying. I'm being honest, though. I don't think this book is dependent merely on human resources. However, I don't believe that superhuman agencies have any basis to work on if human beings are not first diligent. There's no use telling the twins northward until they have entertained the concept flee. Otherwise, the word northward has no meaning, does it? I have undoubted faith that the associates of the authors of these papers who are charged with the superhuman supervision of planetary affairs are well aware of this book, of our problems, of our efforts, of our frustrations, of our bad judgments and of our good judgments, of our wisdom and of our lack of wisdom. And I'm quite sure that they will, in the most intelligent way, take advantage of all of our human efforts. They are not without their resources. I don't believe they can cause so much as they can coordinate. But if we give them nothing to coordinate, they won't have much to do, will they? Now, I don't think faith is a substitute for good judgment and wisdom in our actions. But if we use the best judgment, the best wisdom, the most common sense diligence that we're capable of using, if we keep this in perspective, if we remember that this book comes after health and duty, but before trifles, and if we remember that God is more important than the Urantia book or the Urantia Brotherhood, then I think we'll be useful servants. And then I don't think we're alone in this project. I've got a lot of faith in our friends, but I think the first moves are ours. We've got to give them some grist to work on. We've got to get seeds out that they can perhaps maneuver. I can easily see them maneuver, but it's got to be an easy one. It's a Urantia book sitting on somebody's coffee table, not because he thinks the book is worth a darn. He has contempt for it, but it's a nice blue splotch. It fits in with the decor, you know. It's there for purely reasons of color. And this is a cocktail party. And some joker comes along and sits down and, well, what the heck is this all about? And there's our prospect. We didn't know he existed. And somebody was foolish enough, unwisely, to give this Urantia book to the man who wasn't a prospect, but who put it on his coffee table where the prospect found it. That's the kind of thing I'm talking about. I don't think our friends can send somebody 1,000 miles to find the Urantia book necessarily. But if he's in the neighborhood and going to a cocktail party, it might be possible to attract his attention to a book on a coffee table. This falls within the range, I think, of the manipulable or the circumstances. I think they can do little things, especially if that man is looking and is hungry and doesn't know where to look or where to seek. There are hungry people.
Lots of them, if we could just find them.
I think of the old civil engineer that died before he ever finished reading the typescript. And his only comment was, "This isn't hard. I've been looking for this all my life." He was in his 80s.
Son of a Baptist, I'm gonna take one to it.
But Bill, I noticed in the quarterly report, Oklahoma City and the vicinity has sold more books than anyone else.
Mm-hmm. How many have you sold down here?
In excess of 300.
Mm-hmm. I think that's about right.
And, but our organization don't show it.
Well,
So where is the trouble?
I think part of it is barren soil, part of it is shallow soil, and part of it is time.
Well, I have a feeling that those people that have a book, if we could find them and sit down and talk to them, go into it a little deeper with them, they become more interested.
Who knows?
Maybe some, but in
I
all
even went to this bookstore down there, had cards printed to get the name and address
Mm-hmm.
of everyone that bought a book. He wouldn't do it. I had a card printed to put in the book explaining to them that there was a society that met weekly, and we'd be happy to have you come any night, and we'd be glad to answer any questions that you might have to ask.
We never got one.
Never got the first
Never
response.
got one.
Gee, we've established how not to do it.
Well, how are you going to get
I don't know, but we know how not to.
No, Bill, I don't agree with you. Maybe after we sell another 200 or 300 books, we'll get one.
Try it again.
Sure.
We don't know.
There is a way to do it. We don't know how.
It's such a little thing, such a little cost, such a little effort to do that.
We know you don't send this broadside to famous people. At least we got no returns on 50 books.
I don't know. You just don't know what you do or know.
Well,
The good Lord knows.
we tried it with 50, let's put it that way. That seemed like a reasonable experiment. And if we'd gotten one reply,
That is, they didn't even acknowledge it.
well, we may have had an acknowledgement or two. Did he find it through that source? I don't recall that that's how he got one.
I don't know. I just remember President Marion and telling some stories. I remember.
I don't believe he got the book that way.
Your dad told me that Blue Airs come up there,
I don't remember.
and he sat down and he had a long conference with him. He was interested to the extent when he was in Chicago, he looked up that address. He wanted to see who was behind it.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know at that time who was better qualified to talk about it than your father. But he
certainly would
He got no response.
Marion said he came by to see what they wanted, what the gimmick was.
The gimmick.
Mm-hmm.
Why did say that?
Mm-hmm. That's a reasonable response. That's normal.
Actually, really intelligent in a way.
I have this feeling that I've gotten a kind of a shift in my feeling about the propagandizing in this book. You might call it getting your second wind. I'm not running a 100-yard dash. I've settled down for a long haul. This is a 5-mile. I've tried a few 100-yard dashes. This is a long haul, and
You weren't too stubborn about it.
I'm going to be damn stubborn about this book.
That's just what you said.
I'm just going to be stubborn.
Pursue it.
And I don't think I'm going to get disappointed very much the rest of my life because I think I've had about all I can take in that area. and I've blown all my fuses and I got in heavy-duty circuit breakers now. I think they'll carry quite a load. I've learned to expect a good deal less of my fellow men, but I love them just as much. But let's face it, this is real. This is the way people are put together. Why we like this and why we are here, I don't know. There's a reason for it. And we're not alone. There are others who would be here except one thing or another. Seems indecent without Van and Helen.
It really does.
And I just figure on keeping plugging. In other words, I feel like, kind of like Grant in front of Petersburg. We're going to fight it out on these lines if it takes all summer, you know?
Well, but we don't know where to fight. That's the trouble. Where to start fighting?
Well, I'd find out about this book. Get better equipped. That's the least you can do.
Well, I talk this book to anybody that I can talk to about without making an issue of it.
I know. I know what you mean. You can't.
Don't you think we're doing better now than we were when we knew less about it?
I'm not.
I think I talk lots more
I'm
when
not
I
getting
first
the
got the book
return.
than I do now.
Huh?
I think I talk lots more when I first got the book than I do now.
Well, we all did.
But I
Now
think
I'm like Bill.
you're more
I don't make an
discriminating.
issue of it. It has to come up natural, see, before I can make my pitch. But I don't get the opportunity for it to come up that way often enough. See, I don't just go in and make an issue of it where I used to.
Well, now let me call your attention to a significant trend. Forget our buddy Carr and this other joker. You take the sale of Urantia books and plot them. Now, we had an explosive sale in 1955 because 300 odd people have been waiting a long time to buy Urantia books, and everybody got an inventory. My advertising buddy got 100 and sent them out. That's probably the last time he'll ever buy 100 Urantia books. The sale dropped the next year in 56. It dropped again in 57. But if my memory serves me, it picked up in 58, picked up a little more in 59, picked up a little more in 60. Now this is an overall, and while the number of Urantia books being sold doesn't prove they're being read, still, it's a figure that has some significance. And the fact remains that she went down, and then she started very slowly going up on a kind of a wavering curve, but it's going up, and it didn't keep on going down. I think there was an embryonic study group I've heard of in Fort Worth that visited the Brotherhood, and when they didn't find any levitation or voices or ectoplasm, they gave up on the book. Well, now they weren't real prospects, were they? They were looking for thrill now. Yeah. We didn't have what they were looking for.
Well, I think there's something like that. Well, I imagine there is in every city for the rest of the world. You just naturally.
Golly, it's human nature. A lot of the people consider what happened with Jesus. He was real popular at the start. Then the authorities cracked down, and all of a sudden, the thrill seekers didn't want any part of him. This was a real test of the apostles. They weren't riding the crest of popularity following a great wonder worker in Galilee. They were following a man that had been kind of ostracized for the pillars of society and of the church. And their attendance just fell off. But there remained a hard core.
One other thing I might mention, which may be a long time in the making, but I think it's embryonic stage. Mrs. Wilson's nephew is in college. That's the son of a sister up there in Georgia. And he is carrying a book with him, and he's, I guess, from what both of the women say, he's really studying the book. And thinks that he will have, they think that he'll have some of the other boys that he's rooming with. Bill, I have one of the women drops here like gold in Montgomery. Would you like to try? Would you like to try?
Sure.
Little speckle babies. One of those little speckle babies.
Wilma, these ladies from Urbana, Illinois, told me that Dr. Sprunger's brother lived there. And he is a real believer in the book. Now, I think they could utilize him a lot in helping start a movement
Well,
there.
if he's studying the book.
But his brother lives there. They both told me that. I discussed it with them and why they didn't have a society there and one thing and another.
We had a couple of notes from Madeline, and she said that she was reading the book, and she said, I want to go back up to Chicago for Sunday afternoon to see my family.
I've done some pretty, I've tried to do some pretty straight reasoning within myself. Because if you don't think, I don't have a feeling of responsibility and obligation. Please, I do. This has been too much of my life for much too long. And I've looked at it this way. Well, what can you do more than you see to do? The answer is nothing. If you try to do more than that, all you're going to wind up is spinning your wheels and throwing up a lot of dust or mud and looking very silly. Now, what else can you do? Well, you can do some praying to be more useful. If you've got nerve enough to sign those kind of blank sight drafts, which your Seraphim, I'm pretty sure, can fill in, and remember, you have to cash them. And I'm almost afraid to do much praying along that line because I'm not so sure that I want much more pressure than some that I've experienced. I mean, you know, you can get a belly full of that too. But that's about the only additional thing you could do, is to take a good look at yourself and say, well, gee, what's wrong here? How can I be a better salesman? I think technique is important. Your point's well taken. It's not enough to know the book. How are you going to sell it? You could be an engineer who could design a product and not be able to go out and sell it, and yet you would know more about the product than any salesman.
Bill, when I first heard you say that you looked actually for luminous fruit in 100 years, I wondered what you meant. I didn't doubt it. I couldn't cope with that statement. But I fully understand and fully appreciate, to my way of thinking, because I can correlate it with the stock market thing. You let a stock market roll along at a certain figure for 2 or 3 months, and it be in a bull phase, maybe 4 or 5 or 6. Once it breaks the barrier, there follows a precipitous rise in the volumes of stock and in prices of those stocks. I think that we will go from one plateau gradually over 10 years. And finally, the impetus of a tremendous number will be attractive to the faint-hearted they're not happy with what they are, but they don't want to be affiliated with a group that's only 10 years old.
Yeah.
They're nuts.
That's
They're
right.
The plateau might be elevated, never precipitously, but gradually, over 12 decades, 9 decades. But once it is broken through, there will be a precipitous and a tremendous rise in productivity of those seeds long since planted. In my impatience, I find has long since been subdued, not squelched, but subdued.
I've just been plain puzzled many times as to what to do. And I just fall back on what seems to me to be common sense. Look at the situation and do what you see to do. And if you don't see anything to do, don't do anything right then. Because what are you going to do if you don't see what to do? If you're a salesman selling heavy-duty equipment to factories, and you're driving across the Mojave Desert, you haven't got any smokestacks out there. But maybe you got to cross that desert to get to Los Angeles. And maybe your first call is going to be at Barstow or someplace like that.
You'd be a fool to stop at Four Corners and spend much time trying to sell heavy.
Let's say hydraulic presses, for example. Yeah. You could be real diligent, calling on every roughneck in Four Corners. We want to buy hydraulic press, mister. And he's just going to look at you and say, what that?
I think the admonition can have the radar.
Yeah. This we can do now. This we can do.
You know, one fellow that Clyde and I have a book out. It was one day said, "Are all the members of the Rancher Society as passive as you and Clyde about it?" And of course, it was just amusing because night after night we'd just die to talk about it, you know. But we could only bring it up every so often, and we'd just give him opportunity. To bring it up, and he wouldn't do it. You know, so boy, we'd bite our tongue and keep our mouth shut about it. And he decided that we were very passive.
In 5 years, he's better going up to work with me.
I've got it. I know a book that sits
Chauncey's
down.
reading the book, A Very Fine Student.
He's got home trouble.
He has Baptist home troubles, and he has occupational hazards that take him out of him. Chauncey, don't worry about Chauncey.
He's reading.
I think Chauncey's sincere.
He
Yeah.
is
Well, he knows a lot about the book.
intelligent.
Which Chauncey you talking about now?
We're sure tonight. Chauncey Hayes.
Talking about Chauncey
I'm
Hayes.
talking about the other one.
Now, the other Chauncey, I'll give the same thing. He's got trouble too. He is an indoctrinated, graduated, recently theological student out of OBU. And the other Chauncey, don't rush him. I invited him to join. Made no big issue of it. Made him very obvious to him he would be welcome. He wants to think about it. He wants to look at our charter again in the city, which I can. The very next time around, I'd make a book on the fact by this fall. He will do. My haste has been, I've just gotten this great thing. Now, Chauncey Hayes won't be in this fall. Chauncey Hayes might be here in 4 years. No. I'll make book on that, Wilma. When you say
Some growth. And they're, I think, doing a pretty good job. They're trying to write papers. They're trying to get together to study.
Bill, did you tell me when you were something that I didn't someone like this? How's she gonna stand to stop that?
I didn't know that she had.
What's the authority?
He didn't, no, he didn't say I said to you, and I'm hard about the book.
Kagan?
I don't think she had when he was there.
No, Pat was there, was the last time I was there.
Well, aren't they, about to open a new, society?
I think they opened
Santa
it.
Barbara or somewhere?
Santa Monica.
Santa Monica?
Mhm.
Well, isn't Marion out there? No, she wasn't on a guest duty.
Mhm.
For some reason or other, she said she first opened with it. I guess Marion's back now.
Mhm. There's gonna be another one in Chicago,
Another what?
Society.
Oh,
Be the seventh society.
So before then.
Yeah. Mhm. Yeah, that'll be the one that Al Levin has put together. He's worked a long time doing it. Mhm.
Well, you spoke about it again. So you think you did? Oh, just think that we are at the point we knew you started the.
I know, you had some ideas.
Oh, I think you need it.
Do you want a teach or a tent?
I want to see. So I know that.
Have you thought of advertising free drinks or something? I mean, you might get some martini
Well,
ranchins.
I've tried everything. When this organization first began to study, and we thought they had developed long enough, they appointed me to start beginning practice, and they made quite an effort to get a bunch of beginners. Maybe I'm not a good teacher. I had as high as 17 there. Lots of nights people some that I never heard of. With curiosity seekers. They'd ask questions and wouldn't come back. I don't know what to tell you. Maybe I give the wrong answer. And, but some of them did. There's one over there. She's still here. Edna and, who? Hazel and Van and, Helen. I had all those in my beginner's class.
Well, they weren't all together. They had been going to other classes.
Yeah, Edna and I started at Chisholm.
And Edna and you and some others and,
Well, here, right in Oklahoma City, there's a chap I work for occasionally. He's with American Iron Machine, Bert Wheeler. Yeah. And I gave him, when you all advertised that talk at the church, I had a date with Bert the next Monday, and he came in for breakfast in the summer room downstairs, and he started out. And he knows me as a hard-boiled management consultant. And he, in his kind of Gary Cooperish way, I call him the deacon because he looks so much like one. He kind of laid that on the table and he said, "Give me about 5 minutes to talk on that subject, will you?" So, we were going to take their sales organization kind of apart, and in the course of the day, I stopped in Richter's. I picked up a book I wanted about the Russian Baltic Fleet, and I picked up a blue book. I came back and I said, "Well, there it is." Well, later on another trip, he and Virginia drove me out to the airport, and I just casually said, "Do you find that blue book interesting?" And she says, "Well, my preacher's got it." She said, "I'd like to read it very much, but I can't get it back from him." Well, I said, "I'll send you another copy," which I did. Now, there are 2 blue books that are fermenting right here in Oklahoma City. I don't know their fate. But she can't get it back from her minister. And she's a little annoyed because she'd like to read it. Well, I think I got at least some topsoil there. I know the ground isn't barren. I don't know how deep it is, but I'm going to take a chance.
I talked to Bert.
Oh, do you?
The other year, there's a Paul, he used to run a tire station service station down there. You're right.
Yeah, Paul
Now,
Wright.
here's the strange thing. D.M. Salyer gives him a book. Paul's very interested in all these church things, those first Christian churches. Talked to me about it 2 or 3 times, then I've got all the stuff he does. But he gives the book to his brother in Colorado, Denver, Colorado. Then he calls me up and he wants me to give him another book. And you know, Bill, I thought something.
Oh, I would too.
That man's got money fire.
Sure.
He just can't be too interested in the book. You don't go around asking people to give you Bibles.
I would put a $12 hurdle up to that man.
Well, I told
You
him it was
did.
at Rector's. I told him to get one at Rector's.
Mhm.
And I saw him later and I said, "Here's the book of Rector's." He simply wanted another outright hit. Well, those things are discouraging.
Yeah.
Yeah, I was interested in that couple that come. I talked to them. Nice people. I thought they would follow through for some reason or
I
other.
didn't know.
You talking about the Peter?
The last thing
Bert and Virginia Willis.
They're very active in the church.
I thought they would follow through on it. I really did.
To me, it was a pure gamble. But Bert brought the subject up, and it was a natural. And I gave him about 15 minutes on the subject in the book that day. What's to lose? With $12, and there's some interest there anyway. One boy down east, Roberto, Bob Limpert, has had this book sitting on his bookshelf for, 3 years, 4 years. And he's a tremendous salesman. He's an advertising type guy with pretty good ideas. And Bob is just too busy figuring out how to sell ice cream and extracts and stuff like that. He ain't got time to read it. I see him now and then, and he wants to know what I'm doing about it, and I tell him. I think he's impressed with my continued interest, and maybe it'll eat on him someday.
Bill, what church is the Iron Man affiliated?
I think Baptist. I'm not sure.
That,
Mhm. I don't know. I don't know anything about it.
that booth ringing, that
And that, you just can't trust these
he
ministers.
can't trust. And he wouldn't admit it to a living soul in his
Probably not.
congregation, and he probably says it avidly every Saturday
Let's
night.
hope he does.
Oh, this is better.
It'll improve the quality of the sermon.
That's like
It's for out of the church.
the book I took out to the OCU. I told you about that, didn't I? Well, we took three.
What's OCU?
The Oklahoma City
Oh, yeah.
University. It's a Methodist university. And Dr. C.Q. Smith, which is chairman of the board now, but he was president. I took 3 books. I took 4 books. I put 2 in the main library downtown, 1 in the branch in Capitol Hill, and took 1 out to this university. And I went in to see Dr. C.Q. Smith, and I told him I had something I wanted to give him. And of course, being a Christian school, they're always ready for donations, and I said, "I'll place this in your library." And they made a card on the book and the number and everything. He kind of glanced through it, and I sat there and talked to him at least an hour. And bid him goodbye, said nothing more about it. About 6 or maybe 8 months later, I thought I would drop back in that university and get the girl library to pull that card and to see where it has been out and who and how many times and see if it was working. No card. Dr. C.Q. Smith had taken it home and still had it at home. Whether it ever got back in the library, I don't know.
Didn't he die?
Oh, no. Dr. C.Q. Smith. So he must have been pretty well here.
During Sunday night class, he thought we came to his heart. She knew so much about it or something that she wasn't learning anything.
Oh, she said that we were in a part down, she just read. Anyway, he's a person that does my job. I agree with her.
She sure does.
There is a way, and every organization that has a specialty to sell, they have a way of finding those contacts. We haven't found them.
Okay. We don't know who's hungry.
And I don't know how to find them.
I don't either. Except to play the long shot. I'll play any odds. I just want odds. That's all. I don't want nothing. I'll play 100 to 1.
You'll run for your money.
Yeah, I want a horse in the race. I don't care how slow and egg he is. I want him there at the starting pole.
You all don't need to bring up the
By the way, who won the Preakness today?
I don't know. No, it's time to quit.
I'll see you all.
Okay.
I'd turn the machine off. It's 9 o'clock. We can sit in Bullville if you want.
I saw her.
Well, if we're going to discuss paper number 38, which is the ministering spirits of the local universes, we really should go back. Well, if we're going to discuss paper number 38, which is the ministering spirits of the local universes, we really should go back to part 1, paper 26, page 285, section 1, which is entitled The Ministering Spirits, and see where we are. This first section in paper 26 introduces all of the ministering spirits, from Supernafim on down to the Midway creatures. Page 285, section 1. And here we can see the subject matter of the paper we're considering in perspective. This paper deals with the last 3 orders of the ministering spirits: Seraphim, Cherubim and Sanabim, and Midway creatures. Actually, we have most to do with just 3 of the orders of the ministering spirits: Seraphim, Sekanaphim, and Supernafim. I think these names are all derived from the term Seraphim and Cherubim, which are known in the Bible. Supernafim is a top-side Fim. A Sekanaphim is a number 2 Fim. A Tertiaphim is a number 3 Fim. An Omniaphim is an all-over-everywhere Fim. A Seraphim is standard. Cherubim we know about as their assistants. Sanabim is not in the Bible. It's a left-handed cherubim, and Midway creatures are in a class for themselves. I think as we consider the nature of Seraphim, if you'll consider the 3 basic orders, again, Supernafim, Seconofim, and Seraphim. Is it working? They're discussed farther along in this same section. They differ fundamentally in terms of their versatility as to whether they have to work in pairs or can work alone. The three orders of Supernophim have to work in pairs only when they're operating on the Father's circuits. The orders of the Seconofim in the superuniverses have to work in pairs when they're working on the circuits of the Father or the Son. Seraphim have to work in pairs when they are working on any circuit. Elsewhere in the papers it points out that Seconofim are much closer in nature to Supernophim than Seraphim are to Seconofim. I think of, if you had a 12-inch ruler, I would say if you put the Supernophim at the number 1 inch top side, and then you put the Seconofim at the number 3 inch, the Seraphim would be down at about the number 10 inch. There's a tremendous gap there. But when Seraphim make the paradise ascent and enter the seraphic core of completion and stop being ministering spirits of time and become ministering spirits of eternity and go back to their local universes, then they move up and close this gap. And members of the seraphic core of completion would be, let's say, at the 5 marker in relation to Seconofim at the 3 marker and to Supernophim at the 1 marker. They can close this gap by evolutionary ascent. I like to think of Seraphim as a different kind of people. They're not humans. And we need 2 new pronouns. We need a pronoun which indicates not a masculine being, but a more aggressive type of non-masculine personality. And then we need another pronoun which does not equal a female person, but indicates a more retiring type of non-feminine personality. There are he's and she's in the seraphic group, but they are not male he's and they are not female she's. The pronoun she is applied generally to Seraphim, and of course they apply it because they've used up he for the sons of God, and our English language hasn't got enough pronouns. I like the idea that there are plenty of Seraphim. They're created in large numbers, and somewhere in these papers it tells us how many of them there are on the planet at the present time. And I think, what's that? Is it?
What it says, how many? Units.
I think I'll look elsewhere. Over on page 1250, at the time of the writing of this paper 114, there were just about 1 billion individual Seraphim on the planet. That means that there are, if you compute the planetary population, people and angels The angels don't suffer too much by comparison. There's supposed to be about 3 billion people here on earth, aren't there? Well, there's about 1 seraphim for every 3 people, or a pair of seraphim for every 6 people.
That's pretty good.
There are a lot of angels down here. Just a lot of angels. There are more angels than Chinese, which is comforting. And that's about all there are that is more than Chinese. Now, of course, there must be an awful lot of cherubim and seraphim here on the planet. And we do not know how many of those there are. These seraphim, to me, run the local universe in the sense that the department heads, the bureau chiefs, the civil service runs the government in Washington. When we think of universe government, we're prone, I think, to overemphasize the function of the sons of God. We think upon Salvington, there's Michael, Emmanuel, the Mother Spirit, Gabriel, Father Melchizedek. But I think most of Salvington is actually being run by the attached seraphim. The veranda decks rule the constellations, but I think the supervisor seraphim actually administer constellation headquarters. The system sovereign runs the local system, but I think the administrator seraphim and the Morancha seraphim actually administer the system government. Lanaforge can only do so much, and if he tries to do more than that, he's not a very good sovereign because he is failing to delegate. And I have a feeling that most of the work that's done up on Jerusalem in terms of the actual running of the system headquarters is performed by seraphim. I don't think that these billion seraphim that are down here on Urantia, or were in the mid-1930s, I don't think that they're all guardian angels. I would dare say that's their largest assignment. But I think many of them are devoted to staffing the services of the 12 departments of seraphic planetary government. And these 12 departments of seraphic planetary government, the chiefs of these 12 departments are all paradise attainment seraphim. Seraphim who have completed the paradise ascent, who have returned to Nebadon to re-enter seraphic service, this time as eternity seraphim. And these completion seraphim are the peers of finaliters. They have the same social standing in the universe that a member of the corps of the finality has. They have done on Seraphington the equivalent of what a finaliter does in going through Havona. I like the idea that seraphim are adventurous. If you'll forgive me for dipping slightly into the introduction to paper number 39, let's turn over to paper number 39 because it has to do with seraphim in general. On paper 39, page 426, we find listed the 7 orders of the ministering spirits of the local universe. And there's a fascinating statement made in the introduction to this paper. When the local universe Mother Spirit creates a group of seraphim, which is about a little more than 41,000 at a time, she means to create supreme seraphim. That's her intent. These are top hole seraphim. highest order seraphim. But it doesn't work out that way. When they test them out, they discover that they've got a distribution of seraphim over all 7 of the original levels of seraphic service. And then they ask an interesting question here. In essence, they say, what is interfering with the intent of the creative spirit? Why doesn't it come out this way? And obviously they suspect that the Supreme Being or the Ultimate are involved, but they frankly confess they can't prove it if they're involved. But something is keeping these seraphim from being produced the way the creative spirit wants to produce them. She wants nothing but supreme seraphim, but she comes out with a distribution of supreme, superior, supervisor, administrator, planetary, transition, and future. And these seraphim, like human beings, like mature human beings, want to achieve maximum self-realization. I think this is one of the badges of maturity, to try to be all that one can be, cheerfully accepting one's limitations. You can't be everything. When I was in the Marine Corps, they taught me with great vehemence that a Marine could do anything except be the mother of a large family. That was the only limitation we were taught to accept. I think we all have our limitations, but within those limits, I think we should strive to do the very best that we can do to make the most of ourselves. And that's exactly what these seraphim do. And that raises a very interesting observation. Now, if we consider, let's say, a planetary helper, such a seraphim is of the 5th order of the ministering spirits of the local universe. And such a seraphim aspires to ascend to the ranks of transition ministers, working in the Morantia life, moving off of worlds like ours, then to move up to be an administrator seraphim, to participate in the running of a local system, then to move on up to be a supervisor seraphim, to participate in the government of the constellation, then to be a superior and finally a supreme seraphim, to function in the overall local universe sense. Now this makes sense to us, doesn't it? This is the way we do things. But it's equally true that a seraphim who is created as a superior seraphim at the very top is just as interested in working down. And this is a little hard for us to understand. The fact that she is created a superior seraphim gives her no aptitude to function as a planetary helper. She has to earn that ability. This is hard for us to grasp because when we grow, it is a one-way growth. We start out as helpless infants, and since we are low man on the totem pole in the whole universe of universes, there's only one way for us to go, and that's up.
Kind of like the boss's son, you started with
Yes.
the bottom and bring him up.
It's a perfect example. You're born into the vice presidential level, and you work as a vice president, but you decide you want to really know how the factory works. And the mere fact that you started as a VP doesn't qualify you to work in the machine shop. You have to go out and learn to be a machinist. And that's just what these seraphim do. Then they want to be foreman of the machine shop. Then they want to get into maintenance and service the boiler room. Then they want to work in assembly. They want to work in the foundry. And they want to work in shipping and receiving and accounting. And then they go back, and now they really can be vice president because they understand all the functions underneath the vice president. I think seraphim are just as interested in working down as in working up. And now you begin to see a two-way processional here in these seraphim.
The ones topside are trying to penetrate bottom side. The ones that start out bottom side are trying to penetrate top side. And this is a small picture of what's going on in the grand universe. Michael, a creator son, I think is just as interested in finding out what it's like to be a human being as we should be interested in finding out what it's like to be a finality. And when the Universal Father and the Eternal Son created our Creator Son, they either could not, at least they did not, give him that information. They equipped him fully in existential divinity, but they gave him nothing of an experiential nature. And they never do impart that. This seems to be something which we have to earn. But I'm very intrigued with the thought that these seraphim try to work down as well as up. I think that we're going to enjoy seraphim. I think that we are going to embark in our paradise ascent. We are going to embark upon a long, long term of real friendship with these beings who are so close akin to human beings and yet so non-human. Non-human but not inhuman. They tell us that we get quite a kick out of them. They tell us that when we get to paradise, and we have been out to tea for the first time with the Transcendentalers, and they've sent along an interpreter of conduct to us, so we'll pick up the right Epsonite forks because we're going to encounter a different table setting than anything we ever saw before. They tell us that we have a predilection, that's a fancy word for the word yen, to hang out with the Supernathim, because the Supernathim are more like the seraphim. We feel more folksy around them because they're ministering spirits. In other words, I don't imagine we sit around in sports clothes or with our shoes off at a transcendental tea party, but I don't think we feel quite so formal if we were fraternizing with some of the ministering spirits. These, I think, are basically friendly creatures. I look forward to making their acquaintance. Look, do you ever stop and think, it's intriguing that we have two kinds of human beings, men and women. We're different. We're equal with each other, but Lord knows not to each other. And as the Frenchman says, vive la différence. These seraphim offer to me two new types of creatures. Not males. I know what they're like. I am one. Not females, who are so like males and yet so subtly different. But two kinds of an aggressive and a retiring type of personality that are not male or female and yet are very real, just as vividly non-neuter as men and women are non-neuter. We're going to have a four-way society up there because I think these seraphim constitute our friends as well as our mentors and tutors. You see, before you get off the mansion world, if you haven't had personal guardians here on earth, you'll get them up there. Every paradise ascender acquires personal guardians sooner or later, either here on earth or on the mansion world career. We all have personal guardians.